The purpose of this lecture is to ask the trainees to reflect on how to support children who have English as an additional language. We're starting off looking at what the government says about how EAL is an important issue. That's a national concern, not an inner city issue. And getting trainees to think about their situation and how it concerns them. It's also looking at the Northwest. Obviously we're in Lancashire here, so we're looking at how the support service supports children who have English as an additional language in Lancashire. Okay, welcome to English as an additional language. So I want you to think, estimate. I'd like you to turn to your talk partner and I would like you to answer this question to start with. Estimate, how many languages do you think there are in England? Can you turn to someone next to you and have a quick chat? Okay, who'd like to give me a volunteer and answer? How many?
35.
Thank you. Anybody else? 100. 100? Okay, 100 or 35. All right, let's go for another one. How many languages do you think were supported in the northwest of England in 2007-2008? Talk to your talk partner and then we'll share. Okay, let's share. Would anybody like to volunteer an answer?
Over 100.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'd say something similar, but obviously with the Northwest not being as culturally diverse as somewhere like London, it's not going to be as high as somewhere like that, so I'd say about something similar, around 100.
Thank you, that's a lovely reasoned answer as well. Okay, one more to test your thinking. How many languages are there likely to be in a classroom in Blackpool? Any volunteers to share this idea?
15 to 20.
Okay, lovely. Anybody else?
I'd say about 5 or 6.
Okay, thank you. The answer is varied, but generally in the UK it's over 200. Okay? In the Northwest, 42 different languages on average, and on average there are 3 children per class in Blackpool. So think about your class and how diverse it is. And then all of a sudden you have a child who has English as an additional language as well. How do you deal with that? How do you make sure that they are supported in their learning? And that's what we're going to be talking about and focusing on so that you can reflect on your classroom. And I want you to think about the Northwest because that's where we are. But this isn't unusual. There is a service in Lancashire that provides support to teachers on how to provide learning opportunities for children with English as an additional language. Here's some statistics. The thing that's interesting to me is Lancaster, 19%. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's not an inner city issue now. English as an additional language is no longer a Birmingham, Manchester or London issue. It is a Lancaster, Preston, Blackpool, Ormskirk issue. Another statistic here is again from the EMAS Lancashire service, and what they provide is a statistic that is looking at the newly referred children. Look at the children, 206, is it 5? 205 Polish speakers in one academic year in the Northwest. Makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, this is now a real national issue. And as such, we as teachers need to start thinking about how to support them, how we can do the best for our children, because that's why we are in this fantastic profession. So let's look at what the government says and some research. There's estimated over 700,000 pupils are recording as having a mother tongue other than English. Wow. The Ofsted 2001 report said 201 languages in one borough in London. One borough, one local authority in London. Now you might think, oh yeah, that's London. Well, actually no, it's a Northwest issue as well. It's a national issue and we should be prepared for it. White, other, black, Bangladeshi and Pakistani pupils perform less well. Why? They shouldn't. Most successful schools have strong leadership. That goes without saying in my view. I think if you have strong leadership, good planning, good assessment opportunities and a culture of high expectations, you're bound to have successful learning. The government has committed a lot of funding for EAL, which is great because that proves they think it's important. That's fantastic. If the government's putting money into this, then that means it's a serious issue. And it means we, as teachers, can provide support to children through a variety of ways. And that's great. The other thing that proves the government's taking this important issue to their heart is schools should accept Britain's ethnic and religious diversity and promote understanding and racial harmony. And this links to the Every Child Matters agenda, which we are all very familiar with. Good. But also to the UN Convention of Children's Rights. This is something that is a children's right to have a good education. And the national strategies that are around, they also have a commitment to supporting EAL learners. And then finally, QCA guidance. QCA guidance have an inclusion policy. It explains loads about inclusion on there, and EAL is one of those subsections that it talks about. So, putting it into context, the government thinks this is important. The government thinks this is a national issue, and so we should see it as something national. Teachers can no longer, even if they're in rural areas, ignore this fundamental issue in schools. It's important. The second section of this lecture looks at how theory relates to practice. So we look at some examples of what theorists say about how you can support children in your classroom and some of the ways you can do that with interactive teaching techniques. There's also thrown in some personal examples of my own which highlight what the theorists are saying. There are two schools of thought about how you support children with an additional language. Immersion is where you're basically in a classroom and you're thrown in the deep end, immersed in the language. Now, those children that you're learning with may have English as their home language, their mother tongue. So you're immersed in all the learning opportunities that the native-born English speakers are learning. And you're learning at the same rate, if possible. Now, bilingualism is slightly different. Bilingualism is where you are being taught in your home language. Now, you could be withdrawn from the class and taught by an Urdu speaker or a Farsi speaker, whatever, and then your teacher is actually speaking English. Or you have a support teacher in the classroom who's supporting you in your home language. So the teacher's saying something and they're translating. And there's a bit of both. If you think about it, immersion is the one that you're going to have to do. Because if you're in a borough like London with 201 different languages, how can you teach and find 201 different speakers? Immersion might be the only way you do it, which is throw them in the deep end and help them swim. In true Vygotsky terms, you scaffold their learning. Bilingualism is something that people do think is worthwhile, and children do learn. They do learn through both approaches. I'm going to give you a personal example. Here are two. One is Omar, and one is Martin. Martin was from Bulgaria. When he first came, he says, "My name is Martin." Okay, do you want to go out for dinner now? My name is Martin. And you're thinking, okay, lovely, okay. I taught him through immersion. Omar, I taught as a bilingual support teacher. And I sat with him in the classroom, and I would help him learn the learning objective. So I'd plan with the teacher, change the learning objective, and make it a bit more simplified and visual so I could help him, but it was a one-to-one support. Now, Martin learnt so quickly. Within a year, he was now playing in the playground, fighting in the playground, arguing, lots of swear words, but also having a huge conversation and writing English, writing stories in English. The first thing I did with him was buy a Bulgarian book and say to him one day, "Hello, how are you?" in Bulgarian. And his face lit up like a beacon. And it was amazing, the change in him. I got him to work with other children who had proficiency in English, good levels of language, who spoke well. And they worked with him on a mixed ability groupings. So again, going back to Vygotsky, which you all know about, I scaffolded his learning, but I also put him with a significant other. So his zone of proximal development improved. He was able to achieve it. Omar was slightly different. and he took a lot longer. So by the end of the year, he was able to fight in the playground, say swear words and play, but he actually had more difficulty in writing stories and discussing and sharing ideas because he only worked with me. So it's interesting. In my view of them, I think they were both cognitively the same, but English was the hook, the difficulty for both. So both approaches are good, but there's one person in particular, Jim Cummins. He believes that immersion is important because it takes approximately 5 to 7 years to become a fluent English speaker. For you to be able to pick up a language, 2 years, basics, communication, going to order something. But to be a native, proficient speaker, 7 years, think about it, that's a whole school career. And the way that people have noted, Ofsted as well as Jim Cummins, on how they improve, the fastest rate, immersion's the fastest rate. Bilingualism, you get there, but immersion's the fastest rate. Cummings further discusses how you can support a child who is proficient in their mother tongue, who has fluency in their mother tongue, is more likely to grasp another language quicker. So really, Cummins is saying the reason that you would learn Welsh if I put you in Wales, or Croatian, or Spanish, is because you are already good at English, your mother tongue. Your mother tongue is already excellent. You can read, write, and communicate in it, which means you will pick up another language easier than if you didn't have your mother language. If you were not very good at your home language, then you'd have trouble. He calls this developmental interdependence. Now, Baker develops Cummings' theories, and he also analyses them. And he says language abilities can be categorised into sections such as reading, writing, speaking, and listening. He says that you learn it through a simultaneous or sequential way, and that basically means you can learn a language whilst learning another. So you could learn English, and you could also learn Spanish at the same time. But sequential is actually you learn one language, then you learn another, then you learn another. Or you learn part of a language, such as grammar, then you learn conversational stuff and vocab, then you learn something else about it, like writing. There's 2 approaches to doing it. What he says, however, is that you learn all of it, whether it's sequentially or simultaneously, through social interactions. Back to Vygotsky. Social interactions. You socially interact with people, therefore you learn a language because you understand where it's coming from, you understand how it works, you understand the nuances, if you like, of it. He also says that to become a proficient language speaker, in this case English, you need to be proficient or good at all 4. You need to have receptive skills and productive skills. And what I want you to think about is how we get there. How do we get children to become proficient? How do we get children to have good language acquisition? Back to Jim Cummins. Jim Cummins devised this framework, which I think is fantastic, purely because it's getting you to think about the learning opportunities you're providing children. If you notice on the edges, there's cognitively undemanding, cognitively demanding, context reduced, context embedded. Basically, things that are making your brain work, things that don't, things that you make sense, that you understand, things that you don't understand. Now, he says that learning opportunities should always be in the quadrant B. This is where it's context embedded. Children know why they're doing it, what they're doing, it's got a purpose. But it's also cognitively demanding. It's pushing their intellect further. They're not coasting. Just because they doesn't speak English, doesn't mean that they are not intellectually able to do things. It's just English is the barrier. So you should be cognitively demanding. You should be pushing their cognitive abilities. He sifts it down to 2 terms, BICS, B-I-C-S. Basic, interpersonal communication. That's the first thing he talks about. To learn a language, you need to have BICS. And that's where you communicate, you chat, you talk. Things about organisational language, such as, I put this here, I put that, close your seatbelt, shut the door, put your shoes on, tie your lace. Have you got your PE bag? Organisational stuff. Instructions. Can you line up, please? Have you got your pencil? Everyone show me your hands. Those sort of things. But CALPS, C-A-L-P-S, Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency, is using language that is to do with reflection, evaluation, analysis. If you think about it, these are high-order thinking skills, and this is what we are encouraging learning to be about, CALPS. We want children to think academically, to think reflectively, to be creative. And Cummings would suggest that to get to a reflective learner, an evaluative learner, and a creative learner, you need to provide CALP skills. You do that by doing B, context embedded, cognitively demanding. And here are some. One-to-one techniques do work. One-to-one with a teacher or teaching assistant or child, significant other, as Vygotsky would say. Interactive techniques, things like show me boards, get up and go activities, drama, role play, hot seating, artwork, music, everything. Demonstration, you demonstrate, they demonstrate, their friend demonstrates. Mixed ability group work. Mixed ability means that you learn from each other. You're learning from somebody who is capable, who is able to share their ideas with you, who make you feel confident. Cognitively undemanding and context reduced are things that you don't really have to think too much about, and you don't really understand why you're doing it. So things like colouring in. That is cognitively undemanding, context reduced. You don't want to do that. You want to make it more interactive. And the way you do that is the quadrant B. A worksheet can be cognitively demanding, but some worksheets aren't. So if you do provide the worksheet, then think how you're going to use it. Make it cognitively demanding and make them understand why they're doing it. There's a purpose for this. The next slide shows you some ideas of how you could use each quadrant, what activities you could do. So here, cognitively undemanding, context embedded. This is what's suggested by Baker as well as some other ideas from myself. Context embedded and cognitively demanding is in the box. You need to provide role-play dramatic stories, turn-taking. Turn-taking takes a lot of thinking. It does, if you think about it, because you have a lot of social skills in that and a lot of language. Group work involves as well. Cognitively undemanding, you can see here. Describing stories on TV. You think actually that's quite good, but you have to know what you've seen. Think about the X Factor or Strictly Come Dancing. Okay, how would you describe John Sargent? Okay, unless you knew who John Sargent was and you'd watched him, and you could then use descriptive language such as stomping, sliding, moving, turning. These words are abstract unless you see it. So discussing a story is quite hard sometimes unless people have a contextual understanding and you've got the language with it. So you need to make it real. They have to understand why they're doing it. It has to be context embedded. Because if they don't understand it, if there's no cultural hook, cultural reference, there's no understanding to them. So, for you to develop high-order thinking skills, CALP, with children, you need to try and think of making things obvious and relevant and interesting and interactive and visual and kinesthetic, all these things. Frankly, it's good teaching. There is criticism of Cummings' work and the CALPs and Bilk in particular. Wiley talks that BICS and CALP shouldn't be seen as hierarchical. BICS isn't less important than CALPs. CALPs is just as significant as BICS because you need to have the social communication to get on in life. So you need to be able to communicate basic stuff, such as, have you got my pencil? I need to go to the loo. I need to line up, when's dinner? As well as, hey, did you watch the football game last night? Etc. So these sort of communication ones means that you're socially part of the community. and then it'll help you develop the context of CALP. It'll help you develop the cognitive development on that, the academic abilities.